All right, so welcome to our last episode from here in central and upstate New York. Today I'm at Oswego, New York, and we're here to, well, see this place, which is Fort Ontario, right here in Oswego along the Great Lakes. Now, unfortunately, about a week before we come here, Fort Ontario closed to the public. I had special permission to actually go in here, but with time consumptions, well, that didn't happen. So we have another different video for you about Fort Ontario. We're going to bring you Fort Ontario in a little bit of a different way. So the first interpretive plaque we have here is Fort Ontario during World War I. Now, Fort Ontario was used during the French and Indian War. There was a fortification here, not the one you see behind me, but another. And then there was one here during the War of 1812. There was one here during the American Civil War with troops stationed here. And then there was also one here during the Spanish-American War. This fortification was used, World War I and World War II. But what you have here is talking about Fort Ontario during World War I. It was called General Hospital Number 5. It was used as a hospital. And the fort and a lot of the buildings that you see around us were here at that time, and they were used for this. So you had the American Red Cross here, you had doctors here, you had all of these wounded coming back home here to Oswego, New York, to Fort Ontario from France. And this place saw a lot of patients that would unfortunately perish. And then it also had a lot of patients who were losing limbs and different things. And you have some soldiers here. You had 2 ambulance companies, 2 base hospitals, and replacement personnel were trained at the fort for one of the base hospitals that served overseas. So you also had a lot of people going from here overseas to the front lines. Soldier patients were initially received from recruitment camps in Syracuse to the northeast, but later 90% came from overseas. At its peak, 1,000 patients were treated here every month. Some civilians were treated at the fort due to the medical expertise available and wartime shortages of doctors in local hospitals. Ontario functioned as a general hospital for the treatment of around 8,000 medical, surgical, and venereal cases, and also served as a reconstruction hospital. Approximately 200 patients died at General Hospital 5, including 70 from the Spanish influenza during the 1819 pandemic. So yeah, these buildings and the fort itself served a much larger purpose during World War I. Those of you who like ghost stories, well, this is Legends and Lore. This is called The Post Ghost. George Fights of the King's Royal Regiment of New York died November 30th, 1782. We're walking up to another interpretive plaque here, so let's go take a look and see what this one has to say. So what you have here is 1759, the summer of 1759, in July to be precise. You have Captain Pierre Prochet, who was the commandant of Fort Niagara. He surrenders his post to Sir William Johnston and the British take possession of the fort. So Fort Niagara was in this location at Lake Ontario and the Niagara River. And then you have Prideaux's campaign, A Long Route to Victory. So this is talking about the sieges that is happening here at Fort Niagara before the fortification you see here was put in place. So there was a lot going on here during the French and Indian Wars, and you can see that displayed right here. You have Niagara Falls, you have his route, and to where we're at right in here. And this is where Fort Niagara was. And this is Prideaux's campaign. Now, I'm probably butchering his name. I know. You can leave that in the comments below that you suck on saying names. It's okay. I know that. But this is all of the French and Indian War actions you're going to have in this area. And this place right here is going to play key to this. Campaigns in the North American wilderness required extensive planning and massive manpower to reach the objective safely and successfully. For his army, the distance from Fort Stanwix to Fort Niagara was not easy to overcome, as he transported their food, weapons, shelters, and cannons across half of the colony of New York. The army used the natural waterways as much as possible, and they followed in Mohawk River here, Wood Creek, Oneida Lake, and the Oswego River. And Lake Ontario was used to reach their objective. So where we were earlier in this series of Fort Stanwix, these men made their way up that military road into this area, and then you're going to have the attack here on the rear guard. And you've got ruins of the fort from the 1756 attack, and then there's temporary fortifications that were made here from barrels and supplies that were held in reserve from his campaign. And all of this is going to happen right across this field here in this area. There's a baseball field out there now, and of course this place is grown up, but you're going to have around 1,200 British troops here who are trying to dislodge the French, and believing they were in danger of being cut off, they panicked and made a frantic rush to regain their boats, even knocking down even knocking down commanders and officers when they tried to stop him. And then you had a French and Indian attack force of about 1,200 under the famous Sulpician missionary Abe Piquet and Duc de la Corne, who had left Fort de la Présentation on the St. Lawrence River and secretly landed their boats about a mile just east of the Oswego, where they quickly surprised a party of woodcutters. So you've got all kinds of stuff going on here. And then we have the War of 1812. We have all of that going on. The American Revolution, we have all of that going on. There's a lot to see here at Fort Ontario. Now, let's fast forward a long time in the history to World War II. What happens here at Fort Ontario in World War II? Well, we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But first, let's give you a glimpse at Fort Ontario. So like I said, well, we can't go inside of Fort Ontario because it's closed. And to sit here and try to explain to you all of the history of this fortification would take forever, because it spans before the French and Indian Wars all the way up through World War II. This is one of the most historic fortifications in the entire country. Fort Ontario is a must-see if you're a history nerd. But since it's the off season, they are closed for the winter, we can't go in here. But can we? We can see it from the air. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you along. We're going to get up in the air and we're going to take a flight right over Fort Ontario. Enjoy the flight. I'll see you back on the ground. So I hope you enjoyed the flight. Welcome back on the ground. And now we are going to take another look at another little piece of history about Fort Ontario. And in my opinion, is one of the coolest pieces of history that this fort has to offer that is often forgotten about when we're talking about World War II history. Because this place was a safe haven for about 900 people. Let's go see what I'm talking about. So where we are standing right now is probably one of my favorite historic sites I've ever stood on, because this is the site of the only internment camp for Jewish Holocaust survivors during World War II in the United States. So why was that? Let's examine some of the history of this place. August 1944 to February 1946 saw Fort Ontario serve as the only refugee shelter or temporary safe haven in the United States for mostly Jewish victims of the Nazi Holocaust. Before leaving Italy, the refugees signed contracts which bound them to return to Europe when peace resumed. If left to the Congressional Committee on the Immigration and Naturalization or the Justice of State Departments, most refugees would have been returned to Europe, where homes and families were likely destroyed and faced persecution from those who took their property. However, efforts on their behalf by a National Support Committee, Oswego residents here, Jewish organizations, and others prevailed, and President Harry S. Truman issued an executive order allowing nearly all of the shelter residents to immigrate to the U.S. if they wish. Most chose to remain in the United States. So President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in August of 1944, signed an order that let 900 Jewish refugees, mostly victims of the Nazi Holocaust, come here to Oswego, New York, and they arrived here by train. And if you look right behind this monument, over in that area, you'll see part of a concrete slab. We'll walk over there in a minute to get a closer look, as close as we can. But this is the site of that Jewish refugee camp for mostly 900 Jewish refugees who were seeking shelter from the Holocaust. Here there is a Star of David memorial set up with a concrete memorial slab here that says from 1944 to 46, Fort Ontario served as a haven for 982 survivors of the European Holocaust. This was erected on the 25th October of 1981 by the Syracuse Pioneer Women and Jewish community of Central New York. So let's walk over here and see some of the ruins of the camp and examine this history a little bit more. So you got to imagine yourself being a Jewish Holocaust survivor, having to pack up, leave your home in 1944 and come to the United States of America, to a place you've never been, you know nothing about, and you do not know what's about to happen. You don't know if it's going to be better than what you're facing with the German Nazi regime, or if you're facing a better life than what you had. All you know is this is something you're having to do to stay alive. Most of these refugees are already lost most of their families due to the Holocaust. And now they're here in upstate New York and have no clue what the future holds for them. They have no clue what they're going back home to. And it's got to be a scary situation. And that is just some of the reality of what these immigrants ended up facing when they come here. And at the end, thanks to Harry S. Truman and a bunch of other organizations, most of them chose to stay here in this area of New York. And we have a Jewish population here today in New York because of that. But this place is often forgotten about in memory of the United States. And it was the only one in history during World War II. Why was that? Well, there was a bunch of different reasons. One was FDR and the war. So we're strapped for cash, basically. And how are we going to feed all of these Jewish immigrants if we keep on bringing them in? So that was one of the reasons why they were fighting with the idea of creating more of these camps, because originally they were going to create more of these. They were going to bring more in. It just never happened. So that is the situation that occurred here. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go in, look at the post cemetery here, and see what we can find out in here, and take a look at some of the other monuments out here and see what we can tie to this time period and maybe the time periods before. So this is the post cemetery here at Fort Ontario. It was dedicated on July the 1st, 1906, and is the grave, contains the graves of 77 British and American soldiers, as well as some wives, mothers, and children. The original cemetery was established 300 yards southeast of the fort in 1759 and used from the period of the French and Indian War until its closure in 1815, and when it reopened in 1839, remained an active burial ground until the post closed in 1901. 2 years later, the bodies were removed from their original location and buried in this present cemetery. So this cemetery contains the burials of these men listed here. Some of them died in 1930. There's a Robert T. McElwain who died in 1943. Liza Llewellyn died in 41. So, and then you have unknown soldiers here as well. Here's George Fikes, who died 1782, 1773, Kippur Lore. So let's go in and let's take a look at some of these graves of some of the people that's marked on this plaque. This is a, well, it's a pretty neat cemetery. And one of the oldest military cemeteries I've ever been in. Now, during the Civil War, there were several different troops who were stationed here, some of which were African-American troops. During World War II, you have African-American troops training here as well. So this also played into a huge role of that time frame as well. Pretty neat gravestone there. But these are some of the older gravestones here. This is from 1863, I believe. And then you have some right here. Martin Goffrey, 2nd U.S. Artillery. These are some Civil War graves. And then in the backdrop, you got the Great Lakes. So they were basically dug up from the original cemetery, a lot of these, and reinterred. Now, where are the Jewish, survivors who died here in the count? Because I'm sure during that short time span when they were here, there were some that end up dying from disease and different things. Well, that question I can't really answer. I do not know. But this is definitely a small cemetery for such a formidable structure that stood the test of the French and Indian War, the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the American Civil War, the War of the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II. And, it's just a small cemetery, in my opinion. There's got to be a lot of unmarked graves somewhere out here. Joseph Casper, 1939, May 1940. And with this being a World War I hospital as well, were the graves of those? I don't know. So we got one other structure over here I want to take a look at before we get out of here. This park does close at dusk, and I've got to be out of here pretty soon. But we want to take a look and see what this is about, because you guys are seeing this for the first time with me. You know almost as much about this place as I do as well. This is a monument to the women and children on the frontier. Oswego was a lonely wilderness outpost until the British turned Fort Ontario over to the United States in 1796. Even then, the region was sparsely settled until after the War of 1812. Frontier life was hard. Frontier life was not easy. And this is from the hearth of America comes the heart of America. This is a monument to all of those women and children of all races who lived and died on the colonial frontier. You can see they've got a cooking grate there. It looks like there was once a kettle there, but it's gone. But very cool monument. And then if we walk over here, I'm afraid this is as close as we're going to be able to get. But through these trees, you can just barely make out the concrete. That is where a big portion of the camp for those Jewish Holocaust survivors were, and no doubt spilling into this area as well. Wow. So we have been able to kind of explore Fort Ontario. I wish we could have explored more. Just a word of advice: if you come to New York, central and upstate New York, to explore some of these places, keep in mind at the end of October, even before then, A lot of things closed for the season. I didn't know that. So we didn't get to explore some of the places I did want to explore in this trip, like Fort William Henry, Saratoga, Fort Ticonderoga, and some other places. But we got to see places like Oriskany, Fort Stanwix, and Fort Ontario, and even discover some history I didn't even know about, and some conflicts that I didn't even know about. We got to see some French and Indian War history. We've got to see a lot of things here in New York in 4 short days. So this has been a lot of fun. And one thing is for certain, my opinion of New York has changed. Never been to New York before now, and all I've seen is what you see on TV. Loud, streets of concrete. Well, that's anywhere from the case. It has been extremely beautiful and has been one of the nicest places I've ever been, with some of the nicest people I've ever met. So come here to New York, visit it for yourself, and I've got a plane to catch. So I'm gonna go to the hotel, get some sleep, and head back to my home in Alabama tomorrow. Until next time, guys, in our next adventure, keep preserving history. Stay safe, and well, we'll see you from the next adventure.